Hello again, everybody. Welcome to episode 5. I think last time in episode 4 I mistakenly said episode 3. We're looking at Christensen's US film from 2012, Curfew, today with a 19-minute runtime, according to the Eduqas exam board, which centres around Richie experiencing a depressive phase in his life. I should forewarn you of some references to suicidal intent and self-harm. A chance for new meaning comes, though, when his estranged sister requests him to look after his niece Sophia for a period of time. If these analyses are proving useful to you, I really am grateful for likes and subscriptions, more than you can know. And hitting the notification bell will alert you to the forthcoming episodes. We'll be looking next time at The Gunfighter. Now, the first time I taught Curfew, it wasn't available on YouTube. It was only on Vimeo via the link that I've got for you there, which will be in the description below. It does seem currently to be available via YouTube as well, via this second link. So either or, if you go down the Vimeo route, which can be useful in a broader sense, you'll need to register with an email for an account, but it is free. So don't worry about that. We'll then analyse some ideas with it once you've watched, and then you can go back a second time for a second viewing to consolidate and inculcate that. What will you use? What won't you use, and why? That's a brief way to get it into your evaluation if you're struggling to do that, albeit in balance with more meaningful analyses of other mandated films elsewhere, whichever is most relevant to you in terms of it being cinematography, editing, sound, mise-en-scène, or in a broader macro narrative sense of establishing protagonists, settings, other characters, enigmas, crises, resolutions, binary oppositions. What themes, what meaning and response are you intending within your spectators? Will it help you convey a distinct genre or parallel stories, narratives that are non-linear, or a narrator? In the very opening, we begin with non-diegetic score of some classical music that seems very incongruent or unempathic with the depiction of the diegesis immediately thereafter. We pan to the diegetic sound of the telephone ringing, and the hand that comes from top of frame to answer the phone is covered in blood. We are in an immediate crisis point of Richie lying in a bathtub full of bloodied water. He is slitting his wrists with more intent than Mia, if I can reduce it in that inappropriately insensitive way, rather than, if I can phrase it, merely self-harm, with suicidal intent. The bathtub's full of bloodied water. He's pale. He is with suicidal intent. And his sister, with whom he's clearly estranged because they've not spoken for a long time, and she says, "Believe me, I've got no other choice. I wouldn't pick you. You're my last choice," is begging for his help in looking after her daughter. It gives him some purpose to get out of this bathtub. She ironically says, "You know that you're not doing anything important." He's actually ending his life. We're taken then to this quite comical reverse shot between the very precocious niece and the appallingly pale, cadaver-like, unwell-looking Richie, not somebody that you would entrust your child to. She has asserted that the only safe option for them to go to is the bowling alley. That seems to be more to do with her foreplanning than Mum's. She does seem somewhat neglected, perhaps, until we learn more about the mother thereafter. And during this, they talk about Richie thinking that perhaps she is named after his flick books. Even so, whilst the daughter, the niece, is precociously not really listening and having attitude, he glances over at somebody polishing a bowling ball, and his fantasy vision is of a baggie of drugs being extracted from the finger holes of the bowling ball. He then, within the juxtaposition of the edit, immediately says, we need to go somewhere. And we find ourselves going to a drug den. So our assumption that we're being led to is that he is still heavily addicted to drugs. We've seen the evidence in the opening credit sequence of the track marks on his arm from his drug addictions. We don't have it sit well with us that this young girl is isolated on the corridor awaiting him. She retreats fearful and upset, and he has to assert, no, he wasn't going for drugs, no, he hasn't spent the money. He was going to retrieve the flick books that he mentioned containing the cartoon character Sophia because he used to live there. They go on to develop a bit more of rapport with one another. Some of my screenshots are missing here, unfortunately, but they go to dinner. He reacts when some women are outside the ladies, and then out comes Sophia, and Priscilla stands on a stool before they walk off. We get this happy music scene of a kind of flash mob where she dances and everybody else breaks into a fantastical dance that he's imagining. And she discovers his injured wrists. We think she's too innocent to understand, but the eye contact between them when they depart in the sister's flat says that she's more knowing than she seems. The mother is suffering some kind of abuse. She's going through legal difficulties over a restraining order and has a bruised face. And Richie is left with nothing in the denouement of the film other than to slip back into what must now be the incredibly cold water. We see the direction of his slit wrists is something that intends suicide, without wishing to give too much detail about that or be inappropriate or insensitive or give anybody ideas. If one is slitting one's wrists, one doesn't do it in a horizontal direction across the wrist, a wrist to further up the arm cut along the artery is something that suggests an intent to end one's life. And we pan across to the ringing of the telephone again, and he yanks out the cord, and we pan to only have him in shot again. This is an old-fashioned phone. It gets its power from the telephone line, incidentally, if that was confusing to anybody who is used to either having no landline or a cordless phone that requires a power source from inside the house. He waits. He deliberates, he resists a bit, sort of tortured and tormented, and then he puts the cord back in. It's still ringing. And redemption is offered at the end, whereby he agrees to see his niece once a week. We're left with something of an open denouement to do with as we will as active spectators. So we need to think about meaning and response here. Establishing narrative. We begin with this trope of a red phone ringing that we might normally associate with the Prime Minister's office or some sort of spy film, although admittedly there is one sitting in my hallway. at least just for show, because it's annoying in a modern world of having to touch for particular numbers and options. He's been called in crisis. The sister's crisis. She's completely unaware of his crisis, that he was in the midst of committing suicide. She says, ironically, we know you're not doing anything important. His last choice is equivalent to the fact that we think that he's going to reject this, because he starts to sort of hold the phone away from him because the sister's being quite aggressive and abusive. But actually, he's just doing that before he yanks on the cord to drag the telephone closer. So even in the acting and the performance and mise-en-scène there, the direction, there's some ambiguity that we think he's just going to dismiss this, and then that gesture actually means the opposite of dragging the phone closer to listen. This is his chance for redemption and to regain a relationship with his family. Establishing the other characters, the niece is pretty precocious. He seems a bit self-involved to expect that the child was named after his flipbook, but it could well be the case. We get this idea that there was an accident, but we don't know what it was. He's preoccupied with seeing somebody else polish the bowling ball, and actually he fantasises that he's seeing something being extracted, a hallucination of an addict. But it makes us question his motives. He goes with the money to the drug den, ultimately just to retrieve the flip books. The altercation with the women outside the ladies. She pushes for finding out about the accident that she had no interest in beforehand, and he admits that he dropped her. She's amused by that. The dance sequence leads to a stark juxtaposition in the edit from that happiness to the inadvertent revelation of the slit wrists. Her eye contact in her goodbye hug with him reveals greater knowing than should be of her years, and his gesture is to give over the flip books. Mum's bruised face accompanies her saying that she doesn't want him involved in the daughter's life because she doesn't want any more false idols. There's obviously been a series of wrong relationships for the sister that the daughter has also suffered within. Yet Richie is the one to remind that she defended him from bullies in school, and that there is a resilience in her that she's lost and needs to regain. He reassures her. But for him, he slips straight back into the tub, only to have the telephone ring. He agonises over ripping out the cord and then reinserts it and gets the request to babysit. There are definite binary oppositions throughout this between him and the sister and him and the niece. An opposition that seems to be resolving in the continuous by the end. The crisis is an immediate one in the suicide attempt, and it returns to this, but we seem to get this notion of a resolution that resolves to forge relationships with family and be redeemed. So there are some themes here about mental health, suicide, drugs, and redemption, human connection and familial relationships. Do go back and have a second watch at least to enjoy and consolidate, and I will see you next time for our brief episode on The Gunfighter. If this is useful to you, please hit like and subscribe for me, and the notification bell for that Gunfighter episode thereafter. Thank you.